and it has Westport. We're going to talk a little bit about Westport. We'll catch up to that. So the organization I work for now has been, this is the 30th year it's been around. It's a membership organization. Its funding largely comes from private contributions from its members. It essentially covers that area that I showed of the watershed of Buzzards Bay, from Little Compton and Westport up to Plymouth and the canal, and then down to Falmouth and Woods Hole and out to Cuttyhunk and the islands. We have a $2.5 million annual budget, 17-member board of directors, quite diverse in their background and the areas that they come from around the bay, a staff of about 17, offices in New Bedford on the waterfront at the harbor, and then another office in Woods Hole, a number of learning centers to engage people and communicate the things that we're doing, and really in time has evolved into an institution in these communities. So, and that really, I think, makes a difference, that it's something that people turn to. There's an expectation that our organization is looking out for environmental resources. But we still retained, I think, an entrepreneurial spirit and sort of a nimbleness that allows us to engage in some of jump right into some of these things and to work on them. I have our mission statement here. I'll point out, because I see, we're an environmental organization, but there's some similarities that I see with Trout Unlimited, having been involved with Trout Unlimited for a long time. That it's about restoration protection, but it's written right in from the beginning, and sustainable use and enjoyment. So this is about everybody getting a piece of the pie that we all share and making sure that we're all taking care of it so that it's always there for all of us. The programs that we engage in, science, like we've been talking about, this organization does a lot of water quality monitoring, is very concerned about the nitrogen pollution problem that I was explaining. Also involved in advocacy, both encouraging policies that are protective of the bay, but more importantly, and I'll talk a little bit about this, making sure that existing rules and policies are actually enforced to protect those resources that they're intended to. Community engagement, so different than environmental education, like your organization, trying to engage people in the bay. Hey, you live in a really special place. There's a lot of great things that you can do and a lot of reasons why you should be proud, and things that you can enjoy with your family and your friends. So introducing people to the water, whether it be through fishing, shellfishing, sailing, paddling, just spending time outside. And then watershed protection, which I'm going to focus on. It's about that sort of, what can we do to protect what's left, so that it doesn't get to the point sort of on the Cape where the pollution has gotten so bad that there's not really a solution that doesn't fully involve technology removing the pollution before it gets out to the water. In much of Buzzards Bay, there's still a lot of natural infrastructure. There's still areas that haven't been disturbed that are naturally removing pollution before it gets to the water. I'm going to talk about a couple of restoration projects because I think they'll be of interest to you. This is the Acushnet River, the mouth of the Acushnet River, which is actually New Bedford Harbor at its mouth. Once a cold water stream, now the most contaminated marine Superfund site in the United States because of electronics manufacturing that occurred here resulted in awful PCB contamination of the estuary. So a lot of the people that you see that live here just have no connection with the water. You live in this really interesting, beautiful geography, but the waterfront is just like skull and crossbones. Don't go near it. So our opportunity was to fix an area that had been disturbed. This is the Acushnet Sawmill, right at the head of tide on that estuary, where the river is coming out into the estuary. So for over 100 years, for 300 years, this had been a site of a mill and a dam, but it had evolved into quite an industrial facility to produce timber. There actually was a lot of local timber production, probably up until mid-century, last century. It continued as sort of a hardware store and a lumber yard, even as they weren't milling their own timber. By the 80s and 90s, it was really tailing out. When we came to it, let's see, And the site looked like this. It was being used for light commercial, light industrial. Had a lot of big buildings on the site. Here's the river. You can see it right here, running under that building, behind this building, between some concrete walls. So we saw the opportunity here that this was going to be redeveloped or reused in some way. Or there was another option, that we could restore it. And since it was at the head of tide and there had been a dam there, that this area, once the PCBs were cleaned out there, that this would be an area where people could actually go. Kids could get their feet in the water, they could get in and catch a fish, whereas they can't further downstream. So a lot of this had to do with actively demonstrating ecological restoration, but doing it in a place where people would really see that and see the power of what you could do. So this involved buying the site, continuing to rent to some of these commercial tenants while we saved the money from that we were earning from those rentals. It was a number of large buildings, and then getting some significant grants to implement restoration for these types of things, which was taking out the dam. Noah was a lead partner in that. Removing concrete bulkheads along the bank of the stream. Here's the dam that was removed, about 5 feet tall. This looks like this now, that it's been removed. The property entrance, which looked like this, a really big building on the left, a big building in front of you. This is the river right here. You can see it, right? It's right there. The following picture was taken from the exact same location last year after we completed the project. Exact same location.
Wow.
So this is a really cool photo I'll show you from above, but you can see the site. So these buildings were removed from this area and this area, bridges removed here, all that concrete pulled up, wetlands recreated. You can actually see some of this habitat over here. It's loaded with ducks, particularly in the winter. The dam came out here. The herring returns, the river herring returns were like 300 fish a year prior to the project. That number has increased progressively every year to now over 10,000. And we're sort of watching how far that will go. It's still a very urban environment. This picture taken with a drone over the city, but this is an urban environment. A lot of people come here. Which actually might be the most exciting part about the project. Somebody telling me this morning, because the weather's so good on Saturday, the place was loaded. We had parking lot filled, people all over the place. And you can see we put in these gravel pathways to be able to get people around, and then it links to trails that lead off into here, and we've continued to buy land up into the watershed with the idea of protecting a corridor up the river. So that my project, this is the Acushnet sawmill, one that we're really proud of, and now trying to, like the science and how we were talking about the science, translate that to other locations. So this is the Horseshoe Mill Dam. This is the lowest dam on the Weebiantic River. The Weebiantic River comes into the bay in Wareham. This dam, this location that you're looking at is essentially the spawning bed for the southernmost viable population of rainbow smelt. This river also has blueback, herring, alewife, it has lamprey, it has American eel. It has the first tributary up the stream off the main stem, still supports reproducing brook trout. This spawning area right here actually also supports white perch. So there's tom cod, there's hog chokers. These are fish that migrate in from anadromous fish that are particularly targets for sport fishermen. But this dam is hurting all of those. The way it's sort of broken down, it used to be boarded up. This used to be a huge impoundment behind it. The water level used to be up here. Sometimes the water spills over this spillway. This gate has broken. That broken gate, I think, allows the sort of some of these fish populations to hang on. There's also a mill race over here with a lot of broken concrete in it. During some flows, some of those fish can hang on. But essentially, this dam is blocking the movement of one of the most diverse remaining migratory fish populations on the coast of Massachusetts. This dam is actually at the head of tide. When the flow is low in August and you have a big spring moon tide, the water actually from the ocean flows backwards over the dam, throwing menhaden and grass shrimp and blue crab up into the impoundment, and then the birds just go crazy because they get stuck there when the tide turns and they can't come back downstream. I'll just show you. This is 195 going towards Providence from Cape Cod, from the Cape Cod Canal. 495 would be right below the plain here. So the intersection of 495 and 195 just before you get to the Bourne Bridge. So we're looking southwest, sort of like towards New York City, towards Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York City. So this is Marion and Mattapoisett, New Bedford be over there. The Weebiantic River, actually in Wampanoag, means winding river. It's flowing downstream like this. This is the location of the dam right there. So we've acquired this land, hired an engineering company, and worked with the community to go through the process of evaluating the alternatives for taking out the dam while protecting the spawning habitat for the fish, including the smelt and the white perch. And now we have actually the funding in place from some grants to do that, so we're moving forward with taking that dam out.
How much does that whole project cost?
Removal of that dam is expected to be about $360,000 or so,
Okay.
including the engineering that's needed and the permitting that's needed to do that.
How much did you pay to buy the land?
The land, that property cost about $450,000. For the actual parcel, that was about 10 acres that included the dam. We've since added other properties to that around it.
Who owned it previously?
That's interesting. So it was private individual, developer owned it. It was actually, when it was a horseshoe mill and operated as a dam, a guy started a fish hatchery off of the stream, upstream of it. He was concerned about the backflooding of the dam into the hatchery. So the guy who operated the hatchery ended up jumping in when the horseshoe operation went sour. And so it basically became non-economic. He jumped in, got a good price for it, so then it was held by his family, and then it became available for development. So it's just sort of an interesting link how there was a hatchery involved in trying to sort of prevent the dam from backflowing. So and now we'll take it out, but the hatchery's sort of a hobby now. Not sure where that's going.
Does NOAA give you any money for that?
Actually, the money to do the work, and this is sort of a sad side story of it, but the money to do the work comes from the trustee council that manages penalty funds associated with the 2004 oil spill in Buzzards Bay. So it was 100,000 gallons were spilled from a barge transporting oil up towards the canal, right off of Westport. Did a lot of damage, and
Is there active cleanup of PCBs going on someplace in this, where they?
this location doesn't have active. It had metal processing associated with the horseshoes, so we've done a lot of environmental assessment. There are some metals, but that's part of the project to secure what's there, so that it doesn't become any more available. It's not like the other site where it's in Superfund site, very much a problem.
And that the Superfund site is actively being remediated now? Is this
Actively being remediated at a huge cost. Yeah, basically dredging the sediments off the bottom, pumping them, dewatering them to a site that's been created on the side of the shore, dewatering them, loading them onto train cars and trucks, and sending it to be landfilled in Michigan.
Oh my God.
Whose
PCBs were they?
The name of the company. The company's been acquired by Kyocera, so Kyocera is actually the responsible party now. But it was, do you remember the name of the company?
AVX?
AVX, yeah. Aerovox, or the AVX is also.
What can it cost to send a trainload of dirt to Michigan?
I think they've spent about $400 million to date, and they're not half done. So this is looking upstream from the dam that I was talking about, and this this illustrates the difficulty with taking down dams. How, just because it ends up being a beautiful scene that people associate with, and we've found ourselves in those challenges where people don't want what they become used to change. This is actually a completely doctored picture of the same location to demonstrate to people that it's actually going to be pretty nice when it becomes a river again too. And it'll have a lot more fish. Now all of us understand the importance of protecting land for keeping water clean. We learned that from signs like this when we were little kids. And that, I think, for drinking water, that everybody almost takes it for granted. Now, I started to allude to the importance of protecting land for protecting other water resources too, but it's all the same. It's all sort of the same process, and it goes back to this figure when we're talking about this particular pollutant, nitrogen. If it's coming from these sources, buildings, managed landscapes and farms, and from the atmosphere, that by protecting the natural vegetation on the landscape, we can prevent these things from going in sensitive areas. We can prevent fertilizer from being applied in sensitive areas. And it turns out that natural vegetation, forests, wetlands, stream banks, and actually it's the soil beneath that natural vegetation, is extremely effective at removing nitrogen before it gets down into the groundwater, or before it gets into a stream, before it gets out to the receiving water, the estuary. And so it's not actually, a small amount is actually, fertilizing the plants to let them grow, but when I said it's the soil, it's actually microbiological activity in the soil that's converting the nitrogen from a biologically active form into nitrogen gas, and it just dissipates into the atmosphere. Yeah.
Well, just from the history of New England, a drop of rain falls in New England, and on the way to the ocean there'd be a dozen beaver dams. We're finding out now that every beaver dam that holds water for a few weeks is probably takes a third to a half of the nitrogen out of the water. It just has to be put back in the air as nitrogen gas. So which is what they have.
That's right. So it's denitrification from essentially microbial activity.
So if you just have 2 or 3, maybe you don't have a dozen dams along the way.
But it occurs similarly in the soil. So
as
this acid rain that I'm talking about falls here, or if you have runoff from stormwater, it's going into natural vegetation. And this is, you hear about this as it filters. It filters.
And if you slow the water down, then your water tables don't tend to drop as much as they've been dropping lately. So any way you can slow it down,
That's right. So a lot of people call these types of things ecosystem services, or these natural processes are doing things for us for free that we would otherwise have to pay for. The example I was saying before, over on Cape Cod, or here in Boston, because of the density, of course in the city you're going to have to do this, but on Cape Cod you have to invest in really expensive wastewater collection and treatment. And that treatment is actually based on the same chemistry that occurs naturally. It's just that you have to facilitate it in a plant, in a factory, to make it happen. So the idea that a lot of this is happening, we can't actually reduce the amount of nitrogen that's getting into the bays by saving landscapes like this, but we can prevent it from getting so much more expensive in the future if we target certain areas and protect them. So we're still going to have development. We just want to move the development into areas where we can save these landscapes so it's not so expensive in the future. Yeah.
Isn't this one of the big problems about Chesapeake Bay and the striped bass? Because the agricultural runoff in D.C. and Maryland, that whole area down there is partly agricultural and human population runoffs.
Exactly the same process that I'm talking about. And we're actually a little bit better off. I keep comparing, I keep saying, oh, Cape Cod's further down the line. I live on Cape Cod. I'm not trying to be negative about Cape Cod. I'm just saying that so much has been developed on Cape Cod before we caught the problem. Similarly, in the Chesapeake Bay, the situation we're in Buzzards Bay, we have a chance to actually catch that before it gets too far. And some of that is just by chance, that development past Buzzards Bay, from Providence going to the Cape, before getting to the levels that it did on the Cape. And so the concern is, as development catches up in a next cycle, that we're just better prepared to direct development to certain areas and direct protection to other areas so that we can essentially benefit these water resources, whether it just be clean water, no algae, less algae in the bay, or fish habitat for the different types of fish that we value so much.
Well, one more question/comment about the cranberry aquaculture, if you want to call it that. They use certain kind of pesticides, don't they, in cranberry? And I know nothing about that. And also in Rhode Island, there's a lot of turf agriculture in dairy farms. And I don't know much about here in Massachusetts, but is that also a problem with runoff from that, and that affects the soil as well, right?
It does. So I'm simplifying it by talking about nitrogen. You're adding organopesticides. That has, in fact, there's places where there have been impacts to fish from herbicides and pesticides that have been applied to cranberry agriculture.
Yeah.
So our organization works a lot with the cranberry industry, because the cranberry industry is actually one of the biggest industries in our part of the state.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about it, which makes it so tricky, is how they use water. So, for a long time, I've seen how they've converted what were streams that were once trout streams, but it also, even if it's not a trout stream, it's still conveying that fertilizer down to the bay. So we're working with the industry to work on what someone said here, sort of mimicking beaver dams in a way, where you sort of hold it and time the water so that you can actually facilitate some of this denitrification before it gets released and it sort of flushes out. That said, it's still a big challenge. Yeah.
Don't you find though that, for the most part, conservation commissions and local towns and cities have sort of caught up with the need to have very strict regulations on what people do with their property?
In some places, Buzzards Bay is a good sort of spectrum of that, because there's some places like Falmouth, there's all these people that work at, Woods Hole Oceanographic and the Marine Biological Laboratory and the Woods Hole Research Center, and so you have this a different type of demographic. The people that are sort of civically minded and are participating in their community are bringing this knowledge, whereas there's other communities where it's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, and it's just very simplified. It's old-fashioned, and it hasn't caught up. So it's. Certainly, I would expect around metropolitan Boston that would be the case. I think that once you get sort of away from the city, there's more variation. So the benefits of land protection, I talked about filtering pollutants. Some of you brought up some of the other ones: moderating water temperature, keeping forest cover, both not preventing water from being withdrawn to have groundwater impacts, keeping forest cover over the water can moderate temperatures. Important to other terrestrial wildlife for moving up and down the streams, important for the passage of fish to not get blocked, in-stream habitat, making sure that wood is continuing to fall into the stream naturally, which is really important to a lot of species, including trout. Some folks were talking about moderating high flows and floods, you said it, moderating low floods. Essentially, wetlands are sort of holding this water and then releasing it slowly, is allowing for more moderate flows rather than extreme highs and lows. And of course, on top of that, we also have to get our drinking water, and the water comes from the water. It's ultimately all the same source. So our organization's approach has really developed around this. We've gotten very assertive with land protection. We use very strategic. You actually see some of our priority areas. Here's over in Westport, where you folks helped us with. But you can see these priority areas end up being down near the coast or linear, leading down to the coast. Of course, you see these worm-like linear features. They're around the major rivers, the tributaries. This is our approach. Our goal is to increase the amount of land protected in these important areas that are important to water. There's a lot of reasons a lot of organizations are engaged in protecting land. Our approach to this is it's about the water, that we have to do this. It's money well spent now, because if you don't do it, you're going to be spending more money on the problems that not doing it creates. And so in the years since we've started this program, we've protected over 7,000 acres of watershed lands. We're Buzzards Bay Coalition, we're involved in a lot of things, but we've become a land trust. We're actually one of, there's about a dozen of the land trusts in Massachusetts that have become nationally accredited recently, so we've gone through that process and our organization is an accredited land trust. And it's about sort of the volume of the deals, the number of deals that we do, and the size of them, and trying to actually have the most impact in what we're doing. The reasons why we protect land, protecting, like I said, for water, whether it be drinking water, whether it be protecting nitrogen loading from coves and harbors that are important in our area, protecting the rivers, and protecting the bay shoreline. This is hard to see, but the way we're doing this is with GIS, using computer data that's geographically referenced data for almost anything that you can imagine, whether it be its importance to drinking water, its importance to rare species, its importance to trout. We can overlay all of these things, and we use that to very specifically identify where in the landscape is important to focus. I'll go through, I don't want to go through a lot of this because I think I want to wrap it up, but it's our approach. We work with the individual land trusts. Almost every community in our watershed has a land trust, including the Westport Land Conservation Trust, who's a key partner in the Angeline Brook project. We work with them, but we're not limited to working with them because we are a land trust ourselves. We also help the state, whether it be Fish and Wildlife or the DCR, we're helping the individual towns. So regardless of how it happens, that's not the point. We don't have to be the owner. We're wanting it to happen, and we've developed the capacity to do this and make more deals happen faster. And you were a part of that recently. I say we finance conservation. I'm going to explain that because you helped finance our conservation. We've developed a revolving fund that's now over $1 million, meaning we have a fund that our board of directors is managing to essentially forward money if it's needed for the timing of a project. So if we haven't raised the money yet, we have a source of money that we can borrow against so that the timing of the real estate deal it doesn't become a barrier to the project. We manage this in a way where we make it available to the land trusts and the other organizations working in the region. We also raise money, and I list all these things here. That's one of our one of our specialties, that we've become successful at raising large amounts of money for land protection. Most of the land that gets protected is forested, otherwise wetlands. A lot of you talked about cranberry bogs, but of course salt marsh and some agricultural lands in there too. This is showing sort of the increase in the number of deals, whether it be properties that we own or supporting the land trust or making loans, that we're averaging about 10 deals per year, so 10 transactions, and that's more than 500 acres per year. Recently, we completed this project, which is also serving as a model for another project that we're now developing. This is a 415-acre farm on the waterfront of Buzzards Bay. It looks like this. And it's just extraordinary. And to think of a property that big, talking to you folks from this neighborhood, it was a little bit more than $6 million, which sounds funny. Actually, I live on Cape Cod. Like, geez, you buy an acre of land for $1 million in some neighborhoods. In this case, it's very expensive. It's difficult to do that, even though it sounds inexpensive for real estate. But we're able to cobble it together. And the way we do this is look at what grants are available from federal agencies. Would we be able to raise any money from a federal agency through a competitive grant? Could we do that through state funding sources, whether it be partnering with State Park System or Fish and Wildlife or looking for a competitive grant? Here I have also penalty funds from the oil spill. Almost $1 million were contributed to that. Looking to towns to contribute as well, and then doing the private fundraising. My point being here is it doesn't come from one source. We don't sort of establish a project and then find a grant to cover that project. The way we're able to manage all these projects at the same time is sort of have the pipeline of projects and then have the pipeline of funding sources that best fits that particular project in order to get more of this work done.
So when you approach somebody to make a grant or whatever, you don't say to them, well, we're gonna restore, you know, the, Buzzards Bay from here to here with this money. You just say, these are our continuing projects, and then have them add their